The day my parents passed, my sister smiled at me in a way that felt like both comfort and threat. I didn't know then that smile would haunt me. I remember the sound of the doctor's voice more than his actual words. His tone was heavy, deliberate, almost rehearsed, as if he had delivered the same line countless times before. "I'm sorry. There was nothing more we could do." My mind registered the sentence but refused to accept it. The world slowed down. I stared at the sterile hospital tiles beneath my shoes, waiting for someone to correct him, waiting for my parents to suddenly walk through the door, alive and whole. But no one came. It was final. Both of them were gone. I felt something shift deep inside me, something between panic and emptiness. A weight pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. My throat ached, but no tears came. I was still frozen in disbelief when I felt a hand slip around my shoulder. It was my sister, Rebecca. She was 2 years older than me, always the composed one, always the one who seemed unshaken by life's chaos. She leaned in close, her lips brushing against my ear, and whispered, "We'll get through this." When I turned to look at her, I expected to see her crying like me, devastated by the loss of the two people who had anchored our lives. But instead, she was smiling. Not a full smile, not one of joy, but a subtle, restrained smirk, the kind of expression you might wear when you've just won a game no one else knew you were playing. It was meant to look comforting, I think, but to me it felt like something else, something unsettling. It carried an edge I couldn't quite name in that moment, comfort and threat all tangled in one. I tried to push the thought away. Maybe she was coping differently. Maybe she was trying to stay strong for both of us. But something inside me shifted. Even in my grief, I felt a flicker of unease. The days that followed blurred together. The house was full of relatives, casseroles left on the counter, and voices speaking in hushed tones as though silence could shield us from grief. I went through the motions, planning the funeral, accepting condolences, nodding politely when neighbors spoke of how kind my parents had been. Rebecca, on the other hand, moved through it all like a hostess at a dinner party. She stood tall, chin high, speaking with authority. Studied me for a moment, her reflection hovering just over my shoulder. Then she stepped into the room, adjusted the collar herself, and said, with a faint smirk, "You don't have to worry about anything. I'll handle it all." Her words stung, though I didn't immediately understand why. Maybe it was the dismissive way she said it, as though my grief had made me incapable of functioning, as though she were already assuming the role of head of the family. I wanted to snap back, to remind her that I was still here, still capable, but the words caught in my throat. I was too tired, too broken, and so I let her carry the weight. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The funeral itself was a blur of flowers, eulogies, and whispered condolences. I stood by the casket, my hand resting on its polished surface, trying to memorize the shape of the wood, because it was the last physical connection I had to my parents. Rebecca stood next to me, stoic, composed, nodding graciously as people approached us. Every so often she'd place her hand on my back, guiding me, directing me, like she was choreographing the entire event. When it was over and the crowd began to disperse, I caught her watching the house with a look I recognized. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't nostalgia. It was possession. She stood in the driveway, eyes fixed on the front door like a queen surveying her castle, and for a moment, I saw it. The smirk again, small, restrained, but alive with meaning. I brushed it off. I told myself grief does strange things to people, that maybe I was projecting my own fears onto her, but the feeling gnawed at me. A week after the funeral, the house grew quiet. The relatives went back to their own lives, the flowers wilted, and the sympathy cards stopped arriving. It was just me and Rebecca, in the silence of the family home. Every creak of the old wooden floors reminded me of my parents' absence. I wandered through the rooms, touching familiar objects, inhaling the faint scent of my mother's perfume lingering on a scarf, the faint trace of my father's cologne on his old jacket. The house felt both like a sanctuary and a tomb. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at a cold cup of tea, Rebecca walked in. She carried a stack of papers and dropped them onto the table. Throat went dry. "What do you mean it's yours?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head, her smile widening just slightly. "Come on, you know it makes sense. You're not really the homeowner type. You'll want to move on, start your own life somewhere else. Besides, Mom and Dad always trusted me more with things like this. They knew I could handle it." The arrogance in her tone stunned me. My grief curdled into something sharper: shock, anger, disbelief. I wanted to scream at her, to remind her that we had both lost the same parents, that the house was not some prize to be claimed. But I was paralyzed, trapped between heartbreak and rage. She leaned closer then, lowering her voice until it was barely more than a whisper. Her lips curled into that smirk again, the one I had seen too many times in the past weeks, the one that felt like a knife disguised as a smile. And then she said it, slowly, deliberately, with a confidence that chilled me to the bone. "The house is mine now." When the lawyer first mentioned inheritance, my sister leaned back like she already knew the outcome. It wasn't grief I saw on her face that day, it was victory. The lawyer's office carried the sterile smell of paper and polish, as though even the air had been scrubbed of warmth. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in narrow slits of gray morning light that stretched across the heavy desk. I sat in silence, my pulse echoing in my ears, my hands clenched in my lap. Grief was still raw, a wound that hadn't begun to heal. I had come expecting formality, maybe even compassion. Instead, what I found was a battle I hadn't realized I was already losing. Rebecca sat beside me like a queen presiding over a coronation. Her back was straight, her chin tilted slightly upward, her expression carved into calm certainty. She didn't glance at me. She didn't need to. Her posture said it all. This was already hers. The word inheritance made my throat tighten. To me, it wasn't numbers or property. It was my parents' legacy, their love stitched into the walls of the home they had built for us, the laughter etched into the hallways, the warmth that lingered in every memory. I wanted to protect it, to hold on to the house the way a child clutches a blanket against the dark. But slowly, the way she let her shoulders relax, told me this wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. The lawyer slid a stack of documents across the desk. "These require both signatures," he said, "especially concerning the property. No changes can be made without agreement." I reached for the papers, my fingers trembling, but Rebecca's hand moved first. She picked up the pen, twirling it between her fingers like it belonged to her. "It's routine," she said smoothly, almost playfully. "Don't overthink it. Just sign and we can get this over with." Her voice was calm, but I heard the pressure beneath it, the subtle push to surrender, to hand her control before I had even processed what was happening. My pulse hammered. "I'll read it first," I said quietly. Her eyes flickered, just a fraction of a second, but enough for me to see the crack in her mask. Then she leaned back again, smiling as though indulging a child. "Of course. Take all the time you need." But the look she gave me as she set the pen down made my stomach twist. It wasn't patience. It was calculation. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling as shadows stretched across the room. My thoughts spun like wheels on ice. What if she was right? What if my parents had trusted her more? They had always praised her responsibility. I was the one with unfinished plans, chasing whims instead of stability. Maybe they had looked at me and decided I couldn't handle the house. Maybe they had already given it to her. The thought hollowed me out. To lose my parents was unbearable, but to lose their faith, even after death, felt like a second death. The next morning, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, the newspaper spread neatly in front of her. She looked up as I walked in, her lips curving into that same smirk. "You're torturing yourself," she said lightly. "Mom and Dad knew what they were doing. They trusted me. That's why it makes sense for me to take the house." Her tone was casual, final. She wasn't asking, she was declaring. The words burned inside me, but no reply came. She turned back to her coffee, the conversation dismissed as though it were already settled. I couldn't take the silence anymore. I needed clarity, so I called the lawyer's office myself. My hands shook as I held the receiver, my voice cracking as I asked about the property. The secretary hesitated, voice barely a whisper. There was a pause on the other end, then the faint shuffle of tapers. "Yes. She left a document with your name on it. I'm not supposed to reveal the details, but..." The secretary's voice dropped lower. If it's filed the way it appears, it could make the will irrelevant. The house would already be hers. The words slammed into me like a physical blow. My knees buckled and I clutched the counter for balance. My name. On a document I had never seen, never signed. And in that instant, I realized with chilling clarity, my sister wasn't just waiting to inherit the house. She was rewriting the story of our family to make it look like I had given it away. I wasn't prepared for how confidently she carried herself, as if every clerk and lawyer already belonged to her. From the moment we stepped back into the title office, the air felt different. Not because the room itself had changed. Same cream-colored walls, same stiff-backed chairs, same tired clock ticking above the reception desk, but because of the way Rebecca moved through it. She walked ahead of me, her heels clicking against the floor like a rhythm of authority, her chin tilted ever so slightly upward. It was as if she believed the space had been built for her, as if the staff were not impartial professionals but her personal attendants. The receptionist greeted us with a polite smile, but Rebecca responded with the ease of someone greeting a subordinate. Her tone was clipped yet familiar, as though she had been here before, as though they already knew her. And judging by the flicker of recognition in the receptionist's eyes, they did. That was my first pang of dread. She wasn't just walking into this office for the first time. She had already made herself at home here. I sat beside her in the waiting area, but it didn't feel like we were equals. She crossed her legs gracefully, tapped her nails against the armrest, and whispered with calm assurance, "Don't worry. This will be straightforward. Straightforward." The word rattled in my chest like a cruel joke. For her, perhaps, but for me, every breath felt heavier, every second filled with the fear that I was watching my parents' house slip away, one paper at a time. When the clerk finally called us back, directing, she made requests as if she were confirming what they had already agreed upon, and the clerk, though polite, seemed to respond to her familiarity. His tone softened, his movements quickened, as though her presence itself demanded compliance. I felt small in that moment, powerless, like a shadow in my own story. Memories came flooding back. The years when Rebecca had always been the one praised at school for her straight A's, while my creative projects were dismissed as hobbies. The way our parents had called her the dependable one, and me, the dreamer. It was always Rebecca who got the gold star. Rebecca who was trusted with responsibility. Rebecca who could do no wrong. Now, sitting in that office, I realized how deeply those old wounds still lived in me, because even here, long after our parents were gone, Rebecca still carried the crown, and I was still fighting to prove I deserved even a place in the room. The clerk handed over a stack of documents, his fingers brushing past the top page. Rebecca's eyes flickered, and she reached for them before I could, but I caught the faintest glimpse of the papers as she slid them toward herself. Something didn't look right. My parents' will had been simple, clear, and yet these documents looked dense, crowded with legal jargon I hadn't seen before. My chest tightened. I leaned forward, trying to catch a word or two, but Rebecca tilted the papers toward herself, blocking my view with deliberate subtlety. "Just the standard forms," she said lightly, her voice sugar-sweet as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Nothing unusual, but there was something in her eyes, a flash of confidence, almost triumph. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't telling me the truth. The clerk cleared his throat. "You'll both need to review and sign in due time, but some of the supporting documents are still being located. We seem to be missing a file from your parents' original records." My heart skipped. Missing? Rebecca didn't even flinch. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms casually. "I'm sure it will turn up," she said smoothly. "Things like this happen. No need to panic." But the ease in her tone only fueled my suspicion. Missing files? Why was she so calm, so certain? The clerk promised to follow up once the missing records were located, and we left froze, pressing myself against the wall as the sound carried from the living room. "I don't care what it takes," she hissed into the phone. I want it finalized. Do you understand me? Finalized. The house is mine, and I won't let her drag this out any longer. My breath caught in my throat. My hand trembled against the wall. And in that single overheard sentence, my worst fears crystallized into truth. Rebecca wasn't just maneuvering through paperwork. She was orchestrating my erasure, step by step, until the family home belonged to her alone. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed her smirk, and I knew I had to dig deeper. The hours after hearing Rebecca's phone call stretched into an endless night. I lay in bed, my body heavy with exhaustion, but my mind alive with suspicion. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smirk in the lawyer's office, the way she leaned back like she owned the room, the way her voice dripped with entitlement as she whispered into the phone, "Finalize it." Those words haunted me. They clung to the edges of my thoughts until I couldn't bear the weight of them anymore. The silence of the house was oppressive, filled with echoes of my parents' absence. Their portraits still hung on the wall in the hallway, watching me with smiles frozen in time. I paused in front of them, searching their painted eyes for reassurance, for some sign that I wasn't losing my mind. But the smiles that once comforted me now felt distant, unreachable. I knew I couldn't just sit still and wait for Rebecca to take everything. I needed answers. Real answers. Not from her smooth words or her manipulative charm, but from the truth itself, from my parents' will. By morning, I had made my decision. I called the lawyer's office and requested a private meeting. He seemed surprised, but he agreed. My heart pounded as I drove there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The office looked the same as before. Rows of bookshelves, the heavy oak desk, the faint smell of ink and paper. But this time I walked in alone. No Rebecca at my side, no shadow looming over me. I sat down, my back straight, and met the lawyer's gaze with a steadiness I hadn't felt in about the house. It read, "Our family home shall pass to our eldest daughter, who we trust will uphold its legacy with responsibility and care." My heart dropped. Eldest daughter. That meant Rebecca. By birth, by definition, she was the elder one. The wording was unambiguous, wasn't it? But something about it gnawed at me. Why hadn't they written her name? Why leave it vague? My parents had always been careful with their words, deliberate in everything they did. Why choose such a phrase when they could have written it plainly? I read it again, slower this time, letting the weight of each word sink in. Who we trust will uphold its legacy with responsibility and care. That part stood out. Responsibility, care. My parents valued those traits, yes, but what if they had left the wording open because they doubted Rebecca's intentions? What if they meant for it to be interpreted in a broader way? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably as I stared at the paper. "You see why your sister feels certain," he said quietly. "The wording is pointed." Pointed, I repeated. The word left a bitter taste in my mouth. Or manipulated. He looked at me carefully, as though weighing whether to say more. Finally, he added, "It is unusual not to specify a name. Unusual enough that interpretation could matter, especially if challenged." My pulse quickened. Interpretation, that was my opening. My parents had trusted both of us in different ways, hadn't they? And maybe, just maybe, they had left a breadcrumb for me to follow. But even as hope flickered inside me, doubt crept in again. Rebecca was already ahead of me. She had charmed the clerks, made inquiries, positioned herself as the rightful heir. She had always been the golden child, the one praised, the one trusted, the one who could do no wrong. I remembered family gatherings where relatives fawned over her grades, her composure, her future. Meanwhile, I was the one with messy hair and scattered dreams, the one who got smiles tinged with indulgence rather than pride. If it came down to a fight, would anyone believe me over her? The lawyer closed the file gently. "If there are concerns, the documents may not be the only evidence. Sometimes families leave personal writings, letters, notes, the scent. letting it fill me with both comfort and grief. But I kept searching. Hours passed. Frustration clawed at me. Maybe the lawyer had been wrong. Maybe there was nothing else. Maybe Rebecca was right, and I was clinging to a hope that didn't exist. But then, as I pulled open the bottom drawer of my father's desk, my hand brushed against something smooth and firm at the very back. I reached in, my fingers trembling, and pulled it free. It was an envelope. Sealed. Thick. My name written across the front in my mother's handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. My knees buckled, and I sank into the chair, staring at it in disbelief. And in that moment, everything shifted. The fight wasn't over. My parents had left me something, hidden away, waiting to be found. The truth was sealed inside this envelope, and I was about to discover whether it would save me or destroy me. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with rage. That's mine. Hand it over. For weeks, I had seen Rebecca wear masks. The sympathetic sister at the funeral, the confident heir in the lawyer's office, the manipulator pressing me to sign away rights I barely understood. But standing in my room, her eyes narrowed and her body tense, I finally saw the truth without disguise. This wasn't about grief or legacy. It wasn't even about fairness. This was raw possession, a hunger so sharp it cut through any pretense of civility. The envelope burned in my drawer, though her gaze alone made me feel as if she already had her hands on it. I pressed my palm flat against the wood, trying to summon courage, but my knees threatened to buckle. My sister's presence filled the room like smoke, suffocating and inescapable. "Rebecca," I whispered, forcing my voice to steady. "It's not just yours. It's both of ours. Mom said a lot of things." She cut me off sharply, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "She was sentimental. You know that. She wanted to keep everyone happy, but you're twisting her words to make them mean what you want. She trusted me. She always trusted me." Her tone carried venom wrapped in silk, and I felt my chest tighten. I clutched the edge of the nightstand for balance, her words crawling under my skin. Because she was right about one thing. Some scribble of words that changes every... You've misread. You've always misread everything. That's why Mom and Dad put me in charge. You were the dreamer. I was the one they relied on. Gaslighting. I knew the word, but living it was something else entirely. The way she twisted my memories, bent my insecurities back against me, made me question my own reality. She had a way of making me feel like the child I once was, standing in her shadow, desperate for validation. But then I looked at her. Not the golden child, not the responsible heir, but the woman in front of me, seething with greed. And I realized she wasn't as untouchable as she wanted me to believe. "No," I said softly, my voice trembling but firm. "You're wrong. She wanted us to share it. She said it herself." Her eyes flashed, the mask cracking further. For the first time, I saw something like desperation flicker beneath her fury. She lunged toward the drawer, her hand closing around the handle, but I pushed back with all the strength I had. We stood there, locked in a silent battle, the air charged with tension. Finally, she released her grip and stepped back, her chest heaving, her smile reappearing but colder now, edged with threat. "You think that little letter will save you?" she hissed. "It won't. The will says eldest daughter. That's me. A sentimental note won't change the law." Her words cut deep, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Maybe not," I whispered, "but it changes everything else." For a moment, silence stretched between us. The air seemed to hum with the force of our standoff. Then she laughed softly, shaking her head as though she pitied me. "You really don't know how this works, do you? You think feelings and handwritten notes matter in court? Number. What matters is process, paperwork, signatures, and I've already taken care of that." The reminder sent a shiver down my spine. The secretary's words echoed in my memory. "She left a document with your name on it." Rebecca had been working behind my back, crafting a story where I had no voice. I tried to push down the panic rising in my throat. "You can't just erase me," I said, though even as the words left my lips, they felt moment to strike. Every time the phone rang, every time the mail arrived, I felt a fresh wave of dread. She was moving ahead, using her charm and her influence to tip the scales in her favor, and no matter how tightly I held on to my mother's letter, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing ground. Then, one afternoon, the call came, not from Rebecca, but from the title office itself. The clerk's voice was formal, clipped, professional. "We've scheduled an official reading of your parents' documents. Both you and your sister are required to attend. The date has been set for next Tuesday at 10 in the morning." My heart sank. The moment was coming. There would be no more hiding, no more whispers in the dark. It would all be laid bare, and the world would see which of us held the truth. And as I hung up the phone, my hands shaking, I realized with a chill that this was exactly what Rebecca had wanted. A stage, an audience, and the chance to declare the house hers in front of everyone who mattered. The title office felt colder than I remembered, like even the walls were waiting to witness the betrayal. The morning of the official reading arrived with a heaviness I couldn't shake. I barely slept the night before, tossing beneath the covers, staring at the ceiling as my mother's words looped endlessly in my "Gentleness is not weakness. Protect what we built." Those words gave me strength, but fear still gnawed at me. By sunrise, my body felt hollow, drained of energy yet buzzing with nerves. The drive to the title office was silent. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, scrolling her phone with the serenity of someone preparing for a social outing rather than a legal battle. Every now and then, she let out a quiet chuckle, the sound sharp against the tension that filled the car. She was enjoying herself. For her, this wasn't just paperwork, it was performance. When we arrived, she stepped out with a flourish, dressed as if she were heading to a celebration rather than a hearing. Her blazer was tailored perfectly. Her heels clicked confidently against the pavement, and her lipstick was bold, the shade of someone claiming victory before the war had even begun. I followed more quietly, my plain black dress making me feel invisible next to her radiance. She knew it too. She always did. She slowed her pace just enough for me to walk beside her, then leaned close. Recognition when she saw Rebecca. Of course, she had been here before, more than once. She greeted Rebecca by name, her tone warm, practiced, almost deferential. "Good morning, Miss Sullivan. We'll be with you shortly." Rebecca returned the greeting with effortless charm, her voice bright. "Thank you. Always a pleasure." I stood beside her in silence, feeling like an afterthought in my own story. The receptionist's eyes barely lingered on me, her smile fading as quickly as it had appeared. I couldn't help but think, this is what it had always been like. Rebecca commanded attention, admiration, deference. I was the shadow at her side, the one people noticed only when she wasn't in the room. The waiting area was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Rebecca crossed her legs gracefully, her nails tapping against the armrest of her chair. She glanced at me, her lips curving upward. "You really should have worn something brighter. You look like you're here for a funeral." The irony stung. For me, this was a funeral. A slow burial of my parents' intentions, my memories, my place in the home we had shared. I looked down, swallowing the lump in my throat, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Finally, the clerk appeared in the doorway, glasses perched on his nose, a thick file tucked beneath his arm. His voice was steady, professional. "We're ready for you." Rebecca rose immediately, her smile blooming, her posture regal. She walked into the office like it was her stage, every movement precise, calculated. I followed behind, my footsteps heavy, my body trembling, but somewhere beneath the fear, a spark of determination flickered. I couldn't let her win without a fight. The office was as I remembered, walls lined with files, the smell of paper and dust lingering in the air. The clerk motioned for us to sit. Rebecca took her seat confidently, folding her hands neatly on the table, her smirk firmly in place. I sat opposite her, my palms clammy against the cool surface of the desk. The clerk placed the file down carefully, adjusting his glasses before opening it. He began speaking in his measured tone, reviewing the formalities, the estate overview, the process of inheritance. His words blurred together in my mind, each syllable drowned out by the pounding of my heart. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her expression serene. Another page, his brow furrowing deeper. My stomach twisted, dread crawling up my spine. What was he seeing? Was it the ambiguity in the will? Was it the missing file Rebecca had hidden? Or was it my mother's letter, somehow surfacing least expected it? The silence stretched too long, the weight of it pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. And in that moment, as the clerk's hand hovered above the page and his frown deepened, I realized the truth was no longer safely tucked away. It was about to be revealed, one way or another. The silence in that room stretched so long I thought my heart would burst. The clerk's eyes moved slowly across the page, back and forth, his brow knitting deeper with each pass. The air grew heavier with every second he hesitated. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, my fingers gripping the armrest so tightly that my nails bit into the wood. Rebecca leaned forward across the desk, her smirk unfaltering, but I saw the flicker of curiosity in her eyes. She wasn't used to hesitation. She was used to people agreeing with her quickly, without question. The clerk adjusted his glasses, flipped a page backward, then forward again. His lips pressed into a thin line as he lifted another sheet from the file. My stomach churned. Something was wrong. Something he wasn't expecting to find. Rebecca broke the silence first, her voice light but edged with command. "Is there a problem?" she asked, as though the weight of his frown was nothing more than an inconvenience in her schedule. She tilted her head and smiled sweetly. "If it's about the will, I assure you it's simple. The house is mine. That's what it says." The clerk didn't look at her immediately. He kept scanning the pages, his fingers sliding one sheet aside, pulling another forward. Finally, he spoke, his voice cautious. "This file contains conflicting documentation. 2 separate references to ownership." The words hit me like a crack of thunder. Conflicting documentation. My breath caught in my throat. Rebecca's smile widened, as though she had been waiting for the moment. "Yes, I'm sure there was a mix-up. My parents were very clear in their will. It states the house goes to the eldest daughter. That's me. The rest must be some clerical error." Her words rolled out smoothly, confident, dismissed. "Eldest daughter, yes, but another document references a shared ownership, language about both daughters having rights." Rebecca leaned back, her laugh soft and mild. "Shared ownership? That's ridiculous. My parents were practical people. They would never split a property like that. It's obviously a mistake. Please, let's not waste time with irrelevant paperwork." Her arrogance made my blood boil. She was trying to bulldoze him the same way she bulldozed me. Overwhelm, dominate, and silence. But the clerk wasn't so easily swayed. He looked up at her, his expression steady. "These documents are in the official file. They cannot be dismissed so easily." The tension in the room thickened. Rebecca's smile faltered just slightly before she caught herself and replaced it with another mask of charm. She leaned forward again, lowering her voice as though confiding in a trusted friend. "I understand you're trying to be thorough, but my parents were clear. I was always the one they trusted with responsibility. My sister here," she glanced at me, her smirk sharpening, "well, she's a dreamer. She means well, but she doesn't understand these things. That's why they left it to me." Her words cut deep, dragging up old wounds I had tried to bury. I sat in silence, biting the inside of my cheek, fighting back the sting of humiliation. She was doing it again, gaslighting, belittling, painting me as incompetent while she claimed authority. But I stayed quiet, not because I believed her, but because I knew silence could be powerful too. Let her talk. Let her show the clerk her arrogance. Sometimes truth revealed itself in the spaces between words. The clerk tapped his pen against the desk, his gaze fixed on the 2 conflicting documents before him. "I cannot make a determination today," he said finally, his tone firmer than before. "When there is a conflict, the law requires verification. The original deed must be checked." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "The original deed?" "Yes," he replied calmly. "The official title deed is archived separately. We'll need to request it and cross-reference the information. Until then, no changes can be made." The words settled over me like both relief and dread. Relief because it meant Rebecca hadn't won, not yet. Dread because it meant the fight was far from over. Rebecca's original deed would be retrieved from the archive. I realized this battle was only beginning, and the next move would decide everything. My sister followed him with her eyes like a predator tracking prey. The clerk had risen from his chair, file tucked tightly under his arm, announcing that he would need to retrieve the official deed from the archive. He moved toward the door with the quiet precision of someone carrying the weight of other people's futures in his hands. As he left, Rebecca's gaze clung to him like a hawk stalking movement in the grass. Her smirk remained fixed, but her eyes were sharp, calculating, restless. She wasn't watching a man walk out. She was watching her victory teeter at the edge of confirmation. The silence that followed his exit was suffocating. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, exhaling through her nose as though she were amused by the delay. She tapped her nails against the table, the sound steady, deliberate, meant to unnerve me. I sat across from her, hands clasped in my lap, trying to keep still even as my insides twisted into knots. Waiting felt unbearable, and as often happens when silence is too heavy, my mind wandered backwards. Memories came rushing in, uninvited, vivid, cruel. I was 8 years old again, standing in the kitchen with a crayon drawing clutched in my hand. I had worked on it for hours, pouring every ounce of childish creativity into it, imagining my parents would beam with pride. Rebecca was already at the table, showing off her straight-A report card. I remember my father's voice, warm, proud. "That's my girl." My mother hugged her, her smile glowing. And when I timidly held up my drawing, Rebecca laughed softly and said, "That's cute." They didn't mean to dismiss me, I know that now, but their words that day felt muted, secondary, the kind you give a child to keep them from crying. I had smiled anyway, clutching the paper tighter, while Rebecca basked in praise. The pattern repeated itself endlessly. Piano recitals, school awards, debates. Rebecca always shined, and I always existed in the quiet spaces beside her light. "She's the dependable one," relatives would say, the leader. I became the dreamer, the delicate one, the young dreams, clinging to hope, thinking life is about fairness. But life doesn't work that way. Mom and Dad knew it. That's why they trusted me. I'm the one who gets things done. You've always been too soft." Her words burrowed deep, dragging old insecurities to the surface. For a moment, I felt myself shrinking, folding back into the little girl desperate for recognition, desperate to prove she was worthy. My heart pounded, my palms damp with sweat. She wanted me to break. She wanted me to surrender before the clerk even returned. I closed my eyes briefly, forcing myself to breathe. I pictured my mother's handwriting on that letter, her words etched into my memory. "Gentleness is not weakness. Protect what we built." Those words anchored me, pulling me back from the edge of collapse. I opened my eyes and met Rebecca's gaze, steadying my voice. "You mistake kindness for weakness. That's always been your problem." Her smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before she replaced it with a laugh. "You sound just like Mom." And look where that got her. Sentimental, soft, unable to make hard choices. That's why I'm here, and she's not. The cruelty of her words hit me like ice water. My throat tightened, but I refused to let her see me cry. I had given her that power too many times before. Not this time. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching longer than the last. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, mocking the silence between us. Rebecca shifted in her chair, crossing and uncrossing her legs, her confidence slipping ever so slightly with each passing second of waiting. I wondered what was happening beyond that door. Was the clerk rifling through dusty cabinets, pulling out records that hadn't been touched in years? Was he holding the truth in his hands right now, deciding which version of our story would survive? Rebecca broke the silence again, this time her tone sharper, impatient. "He's only wasting time. You know that, don't you? There's nothing in those archives that matters. The law is on my side. Always has been." I stayed quiet. Silence, I realized, was my shield. The more I withheld, the more unsettled. Glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. In his hands, he carried a large sealed envelope, thick and heavy, stamped with the official seal of the archive. And as he laid it on the table between us, I felt the weight of our family's entire legacy resting in that envelope. The truth we had both been waiting for, and the revelation that would shatter one of us completely. He broke the seal, and I swear I could hear my sister's breath catch for the first time. The sound of the envelope tearing was louder than it should have been, like paper ripping in a cathedral, echoing in a silence that pressed against every wall of the room. The clerk's hands were steady, deliberate, as though he knew the gravity of what he was about to reveal. The thick flap peeled open, and he slid the contents out slowly, carefully, as if the truth itself might crumble if he moved too quickly. Rebecca's posture stiffened, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, her confidence wavered. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on the stack of official papers now in the clerk's hands. I felt my own lungs tighten, my breath trapped in my chest, every second stretched, long and unbearable, as though the universe itself had paused to witness this moment. The clerk cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, the faint scrape of his chair on the floor slicing through the silence. He glanced at both of us before lowering his eyes to the page. "This," he began, his voice steady, "is the official title deed as recorded in the archive." Rebecca shifted in her seat, a thin smile tugging at her lips. "Good," she said quickly, her tone bright, rehearsed. "That should clear everything up then. Please read it, so we can put this matter to rest." But beneath her false cheer, I caught the sharp edge of urgency. She wanted this over, fast. She wanted the words spoken aloud so she could savor her triumph in front of me. The clerk adjusted the pages, scanning the first few lines, then began to read in a steady, unwavering tone. "Be it known that the property located at 1743 Willow Lane, hereafter referred to as the Sullivan family residence, is to be transferred upon the passing of James and Margaret Sullivan to their daughter." He paused briefly, his eyes flicking to the next line. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might faint. My triumphant, her smirk blooming across her face like a crown of victory. "There it is," she said, turning her gaze toward me. "Eldest by birth. That's me. It's settled." She leaned back in her chair, her confidence restored, her victory rehearsed. But the clerk didn't stop reading. He raised a hand, silencing her interruption. "Please," he said firmly, "allow me to finish." The smirk faltered. Her eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to protest, but something in his tone, professional, immovable, stopped her. She sank back into her chair, though her foot tapped impatiently against the floor. I sat frozen, every muscle in my body tense, as the clerk's eyes moved down the page. "Further," he continued, "the records note an addendum filed with this deed, acknowledging that while the eldest daughter shall inherit primary responsibility, both daughters shall retain rights of occupancy and equal claim to the residence unless otherwise disqualified by willful violation of the parents' intentions." Rebecca shot upright in her chair, her face paling for the first time. "What?" she snapped, her composure cracking. "That's not possible. There must be an error. The will said—" "The will's language is ambiguous," the clerk interrupted calmly, though his eyes never left the page. "This record exists to clarify that ambiguity." The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. Rebecca's breaths came sharp and fast, her fingers curling into fists against the table. I sat motionless, my heart slamming against my ribs, my throat so dry I could barely swallow. The world narrowed to the sound of the clerk's voice and the words that would define the rest of our lives. Rebecca leaned forward suddenly, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. My parents trusted me. They wouldn't tie me down with sharing. They knew she couldn't handle it. You need to skip to the name. Say it. Say my name." Her desperation bled into the room, her voice sharper than it had ever been. She wanted it spoken aloud, needed it, as though hearing the sound of her name would erase all doubt. The clerk, unshaken, lifted the final page. His eyes scanned down to the line where the heir was named explicitly. His lips parted, his voice steady. "This property shall hereby pass to—" My body froze. My breath caught.
Because whatever he had just seen was about to change everything. In that pause, my entire future hung on the sound of a single name. The clerk's eyes stayed fixed on the page, his brow furrowed as though the words themselves resisted being spoken. My breath lodged in my chest, a stone I couldn't move. Rebecca leaned forward, her lips already parted, her body leaning toward her victory like she could taste it. The silence stretched into something unbearable, and I thought my heart might give out before the truth ever arrived. And then, with a small adjustment of his glasses, the clerk cleared his throat and read the line again, slowly this time, carefully, as though he wanted every syllable to cut through the air with precision. This property shall hereby pass to our daughter, Emily Sullivan. The name hung in the room like thunder after lightning. For a moment, I couldn't process it. My own name had just been spoken, my entire being etched into the record of the home I thought I had already lost. Rebecca froze, her smirk shattered like glass, her eyes widening in disbelief. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. She blinked once, twice, as though the world had tilted beneath her feet and she couldn't find her balance. I sat in stunned silence. My body went numb, every nerve buzzing as if I'd been struck by lightning. It wasn't triumph I felt, not yet, but shock, a hollow, trembling disbelief. I had prepared myself for loss, for humiliation, for being erased, and yet here it was, justice in black and white, spoken aloud for everyone to hear. Rebecca finally found her voice, sharp and shrill. "That's not right! That's not possible! You're misreading it!" She jabbed her finger toward the document. "It says eldest daughter. I'm the eldest. This is a mistake." The clerk remained calm, steady. "The document was amended," he said firmly. "The original deed was filed with an addendum. It specifically names Emily Sullivan as the inheritor, with shared rights extending only under her discretion." Rebecca's jaw dropped. Amended? By who? When? He adjusted his glasses again, scanning the margin notes. "By your mother. It's dated and notarized. Filed with the county archive 5 years ago. It supersedes the ambiguous language in the will." The words slammed into Rebecca, the wee pupil, but also wasn't about winning over Rebecca. It was about honoring what my parents had wanted. Still, a part of me couldn't deny the flicker of vindication that coursed through me as I saw her falter. For once, she was the one scrambling, the one on the defensive. Rebecca's hands shook as she shoved the papers back at the clerk. "No, this is forged. Her finger stabbed toward me. "She must have done this. She's tricked you." Her accusation made my stomach lurch, but the clerk's expression remained unshaken. "These are official records," he said simply. "There's no forgery here. Everything is signed, dated, and authenticated." Rebecca's face flushed crimson, her breaths coming sharp and shallow. She turned to me then, her eyes blazing, and for the first time I saw not confidence, not superiority, but naked hatred. "You don't deserve it," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You never did. You're weak, pathetic. You'll ruin everything." Her words should have cut me, but they didn't. Not this time. I sat straighter, my shoulders squaring as I met her gaze. For once, I didn't look away. "Maybe I am softer than you. Maybe I don't fight the way you do. But this house isn't about power, Rebecca. It's about family. And Mom knew it. That's why she trusted me, not you." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Rebecca's ragged breaths. She pushed back her chair suddenly, the screech of wood against the floor making me flinch. She stood, towering over the desk, her fists clenched. "This isn't over," she spat. Her voice was low, venomous. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll fight this. I'll drag you through court. I'll tear you apart until there's nothing left of you but regret. Enjoy your little moment now, because soon I'll make sure you lose everything." Her words hung in the air like a curse. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out, the door slamming behind her so hard the walls seemed to shake. I sat there in the aftermath, my body trembling, my heart still pounding in disbelief. My name had been spoken, written in the record, etched into history. For the first time in my life, Rebecca's smirk had fallen away, and I had stood taller because of it. But her threat lingered like smoke in the air, a warning that the battle was far from over. But instead of joy, I felt hollow. Rebecca's absence was immediate. For weeks, she had been everywhere, her smirk in every room, her voice filling every silence, her presence looming like a storm cloud over my every step. And now she was gone, the echo of the door she slammed still vibrating through me. The house, our parents' house, was mine. Yet when I stepped inside that evening, the silence pressed down heavier than it ever had before. I moved through the room slowly, my fingers brushing against the familiar textures of home, the smooth banister my father had polished every spring, the worn rug in the hallway where I had once sprawled with crayons and paper, the kitchen table where my mother's laughter used to ring. Each space held ghosts, memories too sharp to be comforting. I should have felt secure, anchored by justice finally on my side. But instead, a strange loneliness clung to me. I had won, yes, but in winning, I had fractured something that could never be repaired. My sister was still alive, but it felt as though I had buried her alongside our parents. I sat at the kitchen table that night, the envelope of my mother's words beside me. I unfolded her letter once more, reading her handwriting by the dim light of the overhead lamp. Do not let pride destroy what we built. Protect it. Protect each other if you can. Her plea sliced through me. I had protected the house, yes, but I had failed at the second part. There was no protecting Rebecca anymore. There was no each other. Whatever bond we had as sisters had snapped like brittle thread. Tears blurred my vision as I folded the letter back into its envelope. I whispered into the silence. I did what you wanted, Mom. I think I did. But why does it feel so wrong? Days passed in a haze. The house was mine, yet it didn't feel like mine. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of Rebecca's footsteps. Every shadow in the corner of my vision felt like her smirk still lingering, mocking me even from a distance. I would wake in the night certain that I had heard her voice, only to find myself alone in the dark. Neighbors came by, offering congratulations when the word spread about the outcome. Their well-meaning smiles only deepened the ache inside me. To them, it was a story of justice, of fairness winning out. To me, it was a story of bloodlines tearing
before a storm. The first sign came in the form of a letter. It arrived one morning, delivered with the rest of the mail, the envelope thicker and more formal than the others. My stomach twisted as I slid my finger under the seal. Inside, the words were cold, sterile, printed in the language of law. Rebecca Sullivan hereby files a legal challenge to the inheritance of the property located at 1743 Willow Lane, contesting the validity of the amendment and the authority of Emily Sullivan's claim. I read the sentence 3 times, my hands trembling, my heart sinking. I had expected her anger, her threats, but seeing it in ink, in official language, was something else entirely. It meant she wasn't finished. It meant this wasn't just a sibling rivalry. It was war. I lowered the letter slowly, my eyes burning. My mother's words rang in my ears. Do not let pride destroy what we built. But pride was already winning. Rebecca's pride, my resistance, the house itself caught in the middle. I stood in the living room, staring at the framed family portrait on the wall. We were young in the picture, smiling, my father's arms around us, my mother's eyes bright with joy. 2 daughters who, at least for that moment, looked like they belonged to the same world. Now, that world was gone. And as I set the legal notice down on the table, my hands shaking, I knew with chilling certainty that my sister was not finished with me. She was coming back, armed with the law, determined to rip the house from me all over again. Just when I thought it was over, she dragged me back into the fire. The summons to court felt like a cold slap across my face. The letterhead was heavy, official, carrying with it the weight of battles fought under solemn oaths and wooden gavels. I held it in my hands, my stomach twisting, my throat tight. It was happening. Rebecca wasn't content to let the truth stand. She was going to pull me into the public arena, where our private war would become a spectacle. The courthouse was a building of stone and steel, its columns rising like judgment itself. The morning of the hearing, I walked up the steps with trembling legs, the letter folded in my back like a stone pressing against my chest. Inside, the air was thick.
Parents' smiles reminded me why I was here, not to win a battle of pride, but to protect what they had built with love.
The proceedings began. Rebecca's lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth, confident, every word designed to cast doubt. He painted her as the dutiful daughter, the one who had always cared for her parents' interests, the responsible heir chosen by tradition and trust. Then he turned his attention to me, and the sting of his words pierced deep. She has manipulated sentimental scraps of paper to distort the intentions of her parents, he declared. This is not about fairness, it is about control. She has inserted herself into a legacy that was never meant to be hers, weaponizing grief to rewrite history. The words landed heavily. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom shift toward me, whispers brushing through the air like wind. My cheeks burned. Rebecca's smirk widened, her chin lifted slightly higher. This was what she wanted, to see me humiliated, reduced to a caricature of desperation. I clenched my fists beneath the table, nails biting into my palms. For a moment, doubt threatened to overtake me again. Maybe they would believe her. Maybe the world would side with the polished, confident sister over the quiet one who had always been overlooked. But then, like a steady hand on my shoulder, I heard my mother's voice in memory. Gentleness is not weakness. Protect what we built. The strength of her words rooted me to the ground. I lifted my chin, my breath steadying as I prepared for my turn. When my lawyer rose to speak, I focused on the truth, not on Rebecca's poison, not on her smirk, but on the letter in my mother's handwriting, on the memories of the home filled with love, on the intentions that pulsed through every corner of that house. This case is not about manipulation, my lawyer said firmly. It is about honoring the true spirit of the Sullivan legacy. The will's ambiguity was clarified by a legally filed amendment, signed and notarized by Margaret Sullivan herself. That amendment names Emily Sullivan. It is not a trick. It is not a distortion. It is their mother's voice, preserved in ink. The judge listened carefully, his expression unreadable. Rebecca's smirk faltered, if only for a moment. Her hand, her thoughts, her intentions. She did not write these words to deceive. She wrote them to guide us, to protect us from exactly this moment, when pride would threaten to destroy what they built. The courtroom was silent when I sat down again. For once, Rebecca didn't smirk. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, her hands gesturing sharply, her composure cracking. The judge shuffled his papers, his eyes scanning the documents again. His expression remained firm, unreadable, his pen tapping once against the desk. Finally, he looked up. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of command. This case presents complexities beyond standard procedure, he said slowly. The documents are valid, yes, but interpretation of intent remains a critical factor. To move forward, I will require additional personal testimony. The words struck the room like a hammer. Rebecca stiffened, her eyes flashing with both fury and opportunity. She turned her gaze on me, the smirk not fully returned, but her hunger for victory burning bright again. My stomach twisted, my breath catching. Testimony meant more than documents. It meant baring my soul, reliving every wound, every moment of favoritism, every whisper of doubt. It meant being judged not only by the law, but by the weight of my own words. And as the judge's gavel tapped once, signaling the end of the session, I realized the next battle would not be fought with paper or signatures. It would be fought with my voice, and whether the world would finally believe it. I stood in that courtroom, heart pounding, about to tell the world what my sister really was. The judge's words still echoed in my ears as I rose from my seat. Additional personal testimony. My legs felt heavy as stone, yet they carried me forward toward the stand. Each step reverberated like a drumbeat, steady but unrelenting. The weight of generations pressed on me. The echoes of my parents' voices, the laughter that had once filled our home, and the bitter smirk of my sister that had turned those memories sour. When I sat in the witness chair, the wood beneath me felt unyielding, a reminder that truth carried its own weight. I swore the oath with a trembling hand, my voice barely audible. But when I lifted my eyes, I saw Rebecca across the room, her expression carved in stone, her eyes blazing with a challenge. And somehow that look steadied me. Sister. It became something else. A trophy. A prize to be claimed. She wanted it not to honor them, but to control it,
to control me. That's the truth I've lived with my entire life. Rebecca shifted in her seat, her lips curving into the faintest smirk as though dismissing my words. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted once, quickly, toward the judge, as if measuring the impact. I pressed on. All my life, I was the dreamer, the one who wasn't taken seriously. And Rebecca was the golden child. She wore that role like armor, and every time I tried to step into the light, she pushed me back into the shadows. I don't stand here to slander her, but to tell you that this is not new. What she's doing now is the same pattern she's repeated since we were children. Flashbacks rose unbidden. Rebecca basking in applause at her piano recitals, while I stood in the wings clutching poems no one read. Her smug grin when our parents praised her report cards and barely glanced at my drawings. Her laugh when she beat me at board games, whispering, "You'll never win." I let those memories spill into my testimony, weaving them into the present. Even as children, she wanted victory more than connection. She thrived on being the one who won, even when winning meant someone else had to lose. And now she is doing it again, using legal loopholes, intimidation, and charm to claim the one thing our parents meant for us to share. Rebecca's lawyer objected, his voice sharp. Speculation. Emotional manipulation. But the judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Continue," he said. His eyes remained fixed on me, unwavering. The strength in that simple word gave me courage. I leaned forward, my voice clearer now, stronger. "My mother left me a letter," I said, her handwriting, her words. She said, "Gentleness is not weakness. Protect what we built. Share it. Do not let pride destroy it." Those weren't the words of a mother choosing one daughter over another. They were the words of a woman who knew her children well enough to see this moment coming. She saw Rebecca's hunger for control. She saw my tendency to shrink. And she begged us not to let pride consume the love she had poured into that home. The courtroom was utterly still, even
Pretending to be noble when all she wants is to steal what's mine. Her lawyer tugged at her sleeve, urging her to sit, but she ignored him. Her words spilled like venom, sharp and wild, filling the room with her rage. The judge's gavel struck once, the sound booming. "Enough," he commanded. "Sit down, Miss Sullivan." Rebecca's breath came fast, her face flushed with fury, but she lowered herself reluctantly back into her seat. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice even but firm. "The evidence is clear. The deed amendment is valid, and the testimony has revealed the intent behind it. The property at 1743 Willow Lane shall remain in the possession of Emily Sullivan." The words echoed through the courtroom, final and immovable. My name again, spoken with authority. This time not just on paper, but as a ruling of law. My throat tightened, my eyes burning with tears. Justice. After all the battles, all the smirks, all the gaslighting, the truth had been acknowledged. Rebecca sat frozen, her face pale, her lips trembling. For once, she had no words, no smirk, no victory. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, but my heart steady for the first time in years. I clutched my mother's letter in my hand, feeling its weight not as a burden, but as a shield. The judge dismissed the court. The room stirred with movement, chairs scraping, papers rustling. But in that swirl of noise, Rebecca rose. She walked past me, her footsteps sharp, her eyes dark and cold. As she passed, she leaned close, her voice low enough only for me to hear. "This isn't over," she whispered. "If I can't have the house, I'll make sure you can't keep it." Her breath brushed my ear like ice, her words settling into me like poison. And as she walked out of the courtroom, her whisper echoing in my mind, I realized that though justice had been declared, the war with my sister was far from finished. Her last words to me weren't about losing the house. They were a threat about family loyalty. The courtroom had emptied, the echo of the gavel still pulsing faintly in my ears. Rebecca, before stepping inside. The windows reflected the sky, the same windows that had once held the flicker of warm yellow light when my parents were alive. For a moment, I half expected to see them waiting at the door. My mother with her apron still tied, my father wiping his hands on a rag. But the doorway was empty, silent. Inside, the air smelled the same. Wood polish, faint lavender from the linen closet, the lingering hint of dust that clung to old houses. I placed the official deed on the kitchen table, spreading the papers across the surface where my mother used to serve dinner. My name, written in ink, proof that this home was mine now. I thought it would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like a weight. For days, I walked through the house, room by room, touching the walls, opening closets, tracing my fingers across photographs that had survived the years. Each room was alive with ghosts. Rebecca's laughter in the upstairs hallway, my father's voice booming from the garage, my mother's gentle humming as she folded laundry. This house was not empty, but it was lonelier than ever. I struggled with guilt. My parents had begged us to protect one another, not tear each other apart. And yet here I was, standing victorious in a battle that had left Rebecca shattered and vengeful. Had I really honored them? Or had I let pride carry me into the same darkness that consumed her? But each time that guilt threatened to drown me, I unfolded my mother's letter. Her words steadied me, her handwriting a lifeline across the chasm of grief. Gentleness is not weakness. Protect what we built. She hadn't asked me to surrender. She hadn't asked me to let Rebecca control everything. She had asked me to protect, and that was what I had done. Slowly, the ache began to shift. The house no longer felt like a battleground, but like something fragile in my care. I opened the curtains, let light flood in, aired out rooms that had grown stale in the shadow of conflict. I cooked in the kitchen again, the smell of garlic and onions filling the air like it once had when my mother was alive. I planted flowers in the garden, kneeling in the soil where my father once tended his roses. Piece by piece, I brought life back into the house, not as a monument to victory, but as a promise kept. Rebecca stayed silent. Weeks passed with no one to be a shelter, a bond stronger than betrayal. Yet my family had been torn apart by pride and greed. My sister had become my enemy, and though the law had ruled in my favor, the victory felt like a scar. On quiet nights, I sat on the porch and watched the sun sink behind the trees, asking questions that had no answers. Could I ever forgive Rebecca? Could she ever forgive me? Was forgiveness even possible when blood had turned poisonous? I didn't know. What I did know was this: I would keep this house safe. I would honor my parents' legacy, even if it meant carrying the burden alone. The home was not just mine, it was theirs, and I would not let their memory be swallowed by Rebecca's pride. The transformation had been slow, painful, but undeniable. I was no longer the sister who cowered in silence. I had faced betrayal, endured humiliation, and clawed my way through doubt. And though the scars remained, I was stronger for them. The house was no longer just a building. It was proof that I had finally stepped out of my sister's shadow. And yet, as I stood in the living room one evening, staring at the family portrait on the wall, a chilling thought whispered through me. Rebecca was still out there. The story wasn't over. It would never truly be over, not with a sister who carried vengeance in her blood. So I ask you, what's the true price of family, if blood can betray more deeply than strangers? What would you do if your own sibling betrayed you? Fight for justice, or walk away to keep the peace? If this story hit home, tap like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more deep, first-person dramas where betrayal meets accountability. Drop your take in the comments. I read every one, and your perspective shapes the next story. And if you want a part 2 from Rebecca's side, tell me why.